He said, go. I don't know. I told you, Matthew, that I'm a man of few words, so this shouldn't last too long. And you have some questions that you wanted me to answer, and I suppose we can get started and see how far.
What comes to mind when you think about growing up in Hilbert?
Well, it was slow paced, which was nice. You didn't know the difference. You were very close to some of your friends, but you did little things, and I guess one of the things that I thought of was we never had a dog in the house. My dad had a hunting dog, but Mother didn't like a dog in the house, so we never had a dog. Well, this Monday morning, we were out in the yard playing, and here comes this little, not a puppy, but a spaniel dog. And we picked him up and we played with him, and we didn't know where he came from. And we had him for 3, 4, 5 days. And then my dad ran across a request by the railroad department to check down if anybody found a dog. He said, yeah, my kids did. Well, we had to return it, which was kind of broke our hearts. But we got a $25 finder's fee from this man who had his dog, and it got off on the train without him knowing about it. He was from Milwaukee or Chicago. So it was kind of an interesting, heartbreaking experience of having a dog for a while.
And how old were you at this time?
Probably 7 or 8 years old, someplace in there.
Like 1943?
Yeah, someplace in there.
So $25 goes a long way.
Well, yeah, right. So we, at least we enjoyed that part of it, but we sure missed that dog.
I think you made up for it the rest of your life, right? How many dogs have you had?
Well, we probably have had 10. Yeah, that's just a guess.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite that many. We've had some good hunting dogs, and dogs that were, we had to put one down. That was really sad to see. You dropped them off at the veterinary clinic, and you were in a small room. I can remember he looked at me and as if, you're going to leave me here all alone? And we did, but we also knew it was going to be worse than that. He was put down. He had cancer. So, no, it was fun growing up in a small town. We had a lot of, played baseball a lot, football, touch football, and of course we had school. And we lived just a half a block to the school, and also the Catholic Church. And eventually my mother and dad built a house across the street from the printing office, because above the printing office is where we were brought up until I was a freshman in high school. And no running water. We had to go to the bathroom outside, and they had outhouses. We called outhouses. That was where we went to the bathroom. And on Halloween, we'd go and tip those things over around town once in a while. And I think we tipped one over once when there was somebody in it. But we for Halloween, we did a lot of things. You know, we would soap windows and play games and stuff like that. So it was a fun era of growing up. We lived above the printing office, and part of the house up there was a porch that had a tin roof. And in the summer, my mother would get 3 big wash tubs, and we each had our own, and put it on the porch, and that was our summer getaway from the heat. Well, I must have thrown mine out over the surface of the roof. So I walked over to get it on a hot tin roof, and I burnt the bottom off my feet. And I can't remember, fortunately, but they told me that the skin just peeled right off. So I'm sure my mother and dad had a hard time with me for about 4 or 5 days from all the pain I was going through. But those are just some of the things. And I guess One of the things too is, I didn't do it. My sister and Lee did off on it. They climbed the water tower, which of course you're not supposed to do. And we did little things like that, but most of the time we just played. And another issue too was in first grade. We had these first grade readers that I could read just great. So somehow or another, my mother went to the back of the book, and that's where they had the words listed alphabetically, and I couldn't recognize one of them. I had memorized these books, so I could convince somebody that I really knew what I was doing. Well, my mother was really excited about that, so she went up to the school and said, "We're going to get another nun in here," because they had first and second grade combined. And the sister said, "I don't know if they're going to get one, but you can try." So Mother went over to the Mother House in Manitowoc to talk to the nuns, one of the nuns over there, and they did send over another nun. So we had, I think, 4 or 5 nuns.
Is that when they found out you couldn't read?
So my mother kept a big eye on me, I'll tell you, after that, as to whether I was getting things done the right way. How you're at that age can memorize so unbelievably. It's amazing.
Yeah. So tell me about this car that was it black? Didn't turn out that way?
Oh, in high school, my dad, of course, had a newspaper, and in the newspaper they would advertise the movies in Chilton, which is where the theater was. And we would get a free pass for ourselves and anybody we were with. So one Monday night, we went to the movies in Chilton. A friend of mine, the other one was a minister's son, and myself. Highly recognized as pretty good kids because we never got caught. Well, anyway, we went to the movie. On the way back, this car was parked on the corner of the high school lot for a long time because that's where the guy kept his car, and he lived about a half a block away. Well, I don't know what made us think of it, but we decided, let's paint that car white. So the minister's son had paint, and we went and got paint brushes, and we painted the car white, which I'm not proud of, but it was one of the experiences I went through. Well, anyway, the next day when they saw this, they called the sheriff, and his name was Kosmuski, and he was a good friend, big Republican, good friend of my dad's. And of course he knew me too because he would come into the printing office regularly. And he was the sheriff, of course, that they called, and they talked to the kids in school and never talked to one of the 3 of us. So we thought, well, we're getting to first base. Well, in the meantime, I had made arrangements to get a haircut, and the barber was subject to seizures. And when he did, he'd have to go in the back room until he was okay. Well, I'm in the chair, and all of a sudden, here comes Kosmuski, and I thought, oh, the game's up. He must have found out we did it. Well, he's talking to Joe, the bartender, or the barber, and said, I just don't understand these kids today. They just do vicious things. I just can't believe somebody would do something like that. And I'm sitting there in the chair trying not to sweat and get red face. Well, during the course of this conversation, Joe gets a seizure. We called it a fit in those days. Joe has a seizure, and he got to go in the back room. So I'm sitting there with Kosmuski, making conversation, and of course I didn't talk a lot then either. And finally, the barber came back in and cut my hair, and I left, and boy was I sweating. But they never did find out who did it. And again, it was a shame to do something like that. But the car looked nicer.
How old were you?
Freshman, sophomore in high school.
That's about that age.
So
I just can't believe that you had a barber that suffered from seizures. I feel like that's like the worst profession you could be in.
Yeah, that's true too, because he didn't use a razor blade with us, but he did with other people.
Right.
And but he had seizures, and again, as I said before, he had to go in the back room. until it was over with. When I went to Notre Dame, I went to accounting, and when you're at Notre Dame, when you go from your first each year, you have to select where you want to have your dorm for next year, which one on which room. Well, I also had the brains, so I would get the chance to pick out the room that we wanted. And there were four of us in total. Got a room in Fisher. I got the room, it was supposedly for a priest, but they didn't have enough priests. On the far side of it, on the south side of it, end of it was a room with two guys. Then there was a bathroom in between, serviced by them, and also our room, which was the next one up. So we had, quite often we had a bathtub full of beer to keep it cold. But one thing, we played a lot of cards, a lot of sheephead. And I mean by a lot, I mean a lot. The score we would pay off about every 2 months was like 863 to 784. And they played in our room. Well, we were playing cards, and the language got to be a little bit strong, using the F word quite often, even in that day and age. Well, there was a knock on the door, and I don't know if it was me or not, and we yelled out, "The effing door is open, come on in." Well, it was a priest. He said, "Do you think you guys could clean up your language a little bit? It's just terrible. I can hear you upstairs swearing away. I would appreciate it if you'd clean it up." So we got caught, and we did clean it up for quite a bit after that.
So you had first pick. Why did you pick that room?
Oh, because first of all, it was very close to the place where we went to eat, because you had a cafeteria style to eat. But it was a nice room, and it was right in the middle of the campus, where the other rooms that I was in, ZOM, and was on the edge of someplace. At that time on the edge, it isn't anymore. And we probably had about not quite a 10-minute walk to go to dinner and lunch. But it was just really a great room.
Gotcha. Do you remember what your GPA was in college and high school?
I don't remember. They didn't have it in high school, I don't think, in those days. At Notre Dame, I didn't know it during the course of the going through it, but I ended up with about an 89.
So you said that you went from there to get a job in Milwaukee?
Mm-hmm. For a CPA firm. Also at that time, you had to sign up for the military on a 6-month program, 6 months of active duty, and 6 years, I think, playing or being a member of the reserves in Appleton. Well, first year at Fontaine McCurdy, it ended in April after the tax season, and then I went into the service. That was about the time I met Grandma, coming home on leave one time, I think, or I don't, maybe I was even out at that time. But I was supposed to go to Appleton for once a week. Well, I didn't like that because I was from Hilbert, and none of the people from there were all around Appleton, so they knew each other and advanced those people rather rapidly, and I was sitting there as a corporal, and I didn't like it. For one thing, I don't like anybody that's not smarter than me telling me what the hell to do. And they told you what to do, of course, in the Army. So I didn't attend meetings anymore. Dropped out. And I went back to Fontaine McCurdy again for about a year. I was always thinking of taking over my father's printing business. He had a very lucrative business. He was a good businessman, and he knew how to make money. And of course, he had to go 8 years of having to put somebody through Notre Dame. So I got sick and tired. of the Army, so I didn't go to meetings anymore. And they never did anything. I thought that history was in my background. I don't have to worry about it anymore. It was maybe 2-3 years. And then I got called up with that call-up of the Army in '61. on the Berlin Wall threat. And I got a letter in the mail that I was supposed to report to a unit in Alabama. We were at Fort Polk, Louisiana. I was actually married at that time, and I should tell you some stories about that. But for the time being, when I got down to Louisiana, I ended up in a unit, and I don't mean to be racist, that was 285 black guys and about 7 white guys. And I knew down there I want to be on the tail end of the shift here. So somehow or another I weaseled my way out of that unit and got into another one from Wabasha, Minnesota. A heavy tank and duty repair company. Well, you know how you know me, I don't know anything about hammers, and from a hammer from a saw or a screwdriver. Well, anyway, at least I was out. At that time, they brought in guys that were had different skills, and they brought these units back up to strength. And as such, we needed a first sergeant because the first sergeant retired as soon as this unit was called up because he wasn't going to go at 60-some years old. Well, they put in a sergeant by the name of Lautenschlager. And boy, that's a strange name, and it's a name that's familiar around in Hilbert. So one day I went up to him and I said, where are you from? Well, he said, I'm from Neenah. I said, do you have relation in Hilbert? He said, yeah, my mother and dad live there. So from there I went into the office and was the mail clerk and everything else. But that wasn't. Anyway, in addition to that, I ended up writing out hardship discharges as spring started to come for these guys from Wabasha, Minnesota, because they needed, their dad needs them back on the farm to help with the crops. So I continually wrote, I must have written, I bet you 20 of them, hardship discharges. And I thought to myself, I'm gonna write one for myself. And I did, and it went through, so we got out of the service a little bit earlier than the rest of the guys. Being in the service was an experience, and I really didn't enjoy it at all, because as I told you, I didn't care for anybody telling me what to do. And the only reason they were there higher than me because they've been there longer. But I left, and Carol and I had 2 kids. Joe was probably at that time 4 months old. And we drove home that day 24 hours to get straight home. And that was the end of the service for me. So it was a little different.
Going back a little bit, what do you remember most about your mother?
She was a disciplinarian. She was a good mother, don't get me wrong, but she was tough. Spankings were not out of line in those days, but she cared for her family, did an excellent job. My mother, though, one kind of thing here, it was kind of private, but my mother had a tough change of life, and she was hard on my dad, and there were a lot of arguments in the house. And to this day, I don't like to argue anything with anybody. I've heard too much of it when I was young, but I'm not chastising my mother and even my dad. That was just happened, and it was part of the life of growing up. And certainly a divorce was never in the cards. It was, my dad had to put up with it, and finally she outgrew it and things settled down. But a good cook, a good mother. She had another thing, she had 3 miscarriages before my sister was born. So that must have been tough on her too, I'm sure. But they worked it out. My dad was a hard worker, a good producer, and the money he could make money. He probably had the most profitable printing business in Calumet County with the way he operated his business, which I think kind of fell over to me too, because when I started my business, I started with one account. And when I sold it to Joe, the gross on the business was over $1 million. So I kind of feel I did a pretty good job of building an accounting practice.
I would say so.
Based upon my, one thing too, when I went to the bank for a house loan and they put my name was Suttner. Oh, you're Len's son? Yep. We'll get this process. My dad opened a lot of doors for me because of his reputation.
About going to confession twice and
Well, I don't know if that fits in this category. Probably as my mother again was, as I told you, was a strict disciplinarian. One day, you had to go to confession every Saturday, and so I went to confession. Got home, and the mailman had brought a package that was addressed to me. My mother said, "What is this?" I said, "I don't really know." We opened it up. I had, unbeknownst to them, I had ordered a book, How to Train a Hunting Dog, for like $7. And I took the money out of my piggy bank and sent it all in, and here was the book. Well, my mother was, "Well, you never asked me whether you could get permission or not, whether you could do that." I said, "No." She said, "You go up to confession right now and tell Father." So I go up to confession. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. My last confession was half an hour ago. He must have laughed. The other part of that is, Janet, I'll get into that story later on, went to confession also. And she had to confess to something that I'll tell you later. Father, she went last and thought she was kidding somebody. She went to confession, finished up, and Father said, "Say, Janet, would you turn the lights off when you leave? You'll be the last one."
You knew who it was.
I was naive enough that I didn't apply to any other college. When I applied to Notre Dame, it wasn't as tough as it is today, but that was a mistake. Because you didn't hear back from them until about April of the spring of the year that you started your freshman year. So if you didn't make it, pickings were pretty slim after that. Anyway, I got this letter that I was selected. And I wanted to, here's my background of going to Notre Dame. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my mother and dad went down to see my mother's sister who lived in Gary, Indiana, which is a suburb of, Hobart, Indiana, I guess, suburb of Gary. So we went down there for a week to my aunt's. On the way down, we went through Chicago. That was the first time I saw a black person. So we went over to my aunt's and stayed there for the week, but that's about an hour's drive to South Bend to Notre Dame. So one of the things my mother and dad decided was we should go and see it. Well, we got there and walked around the campus and went to church, and we were coming out of the church, and this nun was coming towards us, and she said, "Well, welcome to Notre Dame." I get a little sentimental. "Yes, sister." She said, "You know, I know your name. It's John, isn't it?" She said, "Someday you're going to come to Notre Dame." And the third part was, "You're going to be a priest." She had the second part too of something. Anyway, she so impressed me that ever since then I wanted to go to Notre Dame, which I did, of course.
You said you were 6 or 7?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was already enthused about going to Notre Dame, and fortunately I was accepted, even though I painted a car white.
They didn't know that.
They didn't know that. When I told you I was called into the service, we had Mary, but Joe was born a week before I had to leave for Louisiana. So I didn't, that was really a strain on Carol, having 2 kids and nobody else around, and not a lot of money. Well, as I said before, I finally wrote a hardship discharge and got out. So, but on the way down, we ran into a snowstorm in Mississippi. It's the worst snowstorm they had in over 50 years. And we were concerned, we parked. The people down there, they don't know how to drive in snow. So we wanted to get the heck off the road. So we went to this hotel room in Greenville, Mississippi, I think, yeah. And Joe slept in a kitchen drawer, or a drawer in a dresser drawer. And Mary had a crib, and of course then there was Carol and I. And the snow in that room the next morning was this deep by the front door. Because they didn't have insulation or anything like that. So we proceeded there then to go to Indiana, or to Louisiana. Well, I worked hard to find a place for them to stay, because when Kennedy made this call up, the Democratic heads of different precincts bought the houses and then knew that they were going to have to rent them out and make some money. We got there and they were all filled, so we worked hard with another guy by the name of Jack Ramser, and we found a house. They got the bottom floor, we got the top floor. Well, the first night, I made arrangements to rent it. The first night, Carol had to open the cupboard doors, and there was a slant, and she said, "John, come here, the whole cupboard's moving." Well, it was filled with cockroaches. It was just awful. We finally got that under control. And the bed collapsed when we got in. From no active movements, it was just collapsed. And the store, for example, they had the stores down there. They had hamburger, and I kid you not, they're as white as your shorts. It was mostly all fat. And Joe got sick down there. He came close to pneumonia, and we had to take him to the hospital there, which was not the greatest place in the world to get sick. But we plugged it in over there and kept plugging away, and we finally made it, and then it got out. So then I had just started my business in July with a school teacher from Tilton, and this was October that they called me in November. And of course he knew how to teach it, but he didn't know how to apply it. So he was almost on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And when I came home for Christmas, he was really uptight because the tax season was coming and he didn't know anything about taxes. So we got through that, and then when he got back, I bought him out. And he was very happy to get out. And then I just went from there. So in the service, I was lucky to run across this guy and get in the email clerk. And I was fortunate that I got this hardship discharge, because it was probably, I think the rest of the gang got let about June or July. But I was ready to go.
Yeah, with 2 little kids at home, that'd be tough.
Well, poor Carol had to take those kids. And of course, my only source of income was, I don't think you were still working yet, were you, Carol? My only source of income was my pay from the Army, which I'm guessing was maybe $250 to $300 a month. Of course, out of that came a house payment, which was not a payment, but a rent payment. So it was touch and go. But my wife, being as smart and as good as she is and a hard worker, she took care of it all at home. So the home front was pretty steady.
She had a good background being the homemaker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Finding all the deals, right?
Remember what we paid for our first house?
$17,000 for
11, 75.
11 or 12,000 for our first house. And we had purchased that before I went into service. So we had that obligation to buy it, to pay for make the monthly payments. We squeaked through, and that house was up near the courthouse. I don't know where that is or not. It hasn't been moved. It's down to Marytown, someplace down to there.
Someone moved the house?
After we sold it.
Interesting. Yeah, 11 or 12,000 doesn't get you much today.
This is a nice little house. I should tell you the story about my sister Janet. We played basketball on a court that was behind the tavern in town, and they only had 2 rows of people, spectators. That's all they could have in there. In one corner was a big fireplace. It was a big furnace to heat the place. And when you're playing basketball, you made damn good sure you didn't get near that furnace, or you'll touch it, it'll burn you. But then the second floor, there was a shower for the guys, and they had windows, and they had shades on the windows. Well, my sister and a good friend of her, Twink Delante, sat across the street and watched these guys dressing and undressing through the shades by their movements. Well, it finally got the best of her, and she thought, I better go to confession, which she did. And that was the same time, I think, that the priest told her to turn. She was embarrassed to bring it up to the priest. That's the first time I think he told her to go and turn the lights on using her name. But it was funny that they finally got exposed to the situation. But I know some about your dad and Joe. There are stories that Jimmy, your dad, I don't know if I ever told you the story. They lived, we were living in this house right over here. And of course, you know where the school is. Well, he'd come home from school, cross lots, but he'd go through the dime store and he picked some things up and put them in his pocket and came home. Now, I don't know how, did they eventually catch him? They caught him and, did you ever hear that story?
He never shared that story with me.
He'll kill me for bringing it up.
I'm guessing he didn't have any money to pay for these things?
He didn't have any right. But he still wanted them.
Oh, interesting, Tommy. That's funny.
But there's stories about all the other ones too, but that's the one for your dad. When I was in high school sometime. We, and mostly myself, I can't think of who the other people were. There was a cement block company on one of the side streets, run by Suttners, but they were cousins. One night, our gang put a row of cement blocks across the street.
Nowadays,
talk about stupid things, you know.
Yeah, you could get
my.
lumped in with murder charges on something like that.
Pants of water. Fortunately, it was a side street, so we figured they wouldn't be going too fast.
Did your parents grow up here? Or were they born here? Did they immigrate here?
My mother's from Green Bay. She came down to Hilbert and worked at a bank and met my dad.
So she grew up in Green Bay?
Yeah, and side of Duck Creek, which is a suburb of Green Bay on the west side.
Okay.
And my dad was born and raised in Hilbert and didn't get too far away. And you go back in my dad's heritage, two or three generations back, his family came from Austria, and there must have been a single woman on the boat, because by the time they got to the United States, she was pregnant. And that's the start, really, of our generation, the Suttner generation. Starts with this lady getting pregnant. So her kids were, of course, or what were they?
Illegitimate?
Yeah, illegitimate, right. So that'd be the start of our history and yours too. And I really don't know offhand how far generations go back. It was my grandpa that she had, or was it generations back or farther than that?
Was your grandfather first generation, or was he an immigrant?
No, he was here. He was born here in this country.
Your grandfather was too?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was in the tavern business.
Tavern business?
Mm-hmm. Another story I can think of is during the Prohibition in the late 30s, Al Capone who you guys might know,
Oh yeah.
came up north here and got booze, and then went back to Chicago and of course sold it. Well, their cars could only go so far and they had to get gas from someplace. Well, they got gas in Hilbert at my uncle's gas station.
Really?
And they would give them a quart of booze. And of course there wasn't any around at that time, and my uncles took the booze and gave it to Grandpa, and he cut it into more booze, you know, a breakdown. It was strong booze, so that he had some booze to sell in the tavern, even though it was against the law. But
Didn't your dad grow up above Repke's?
yeah, for a while.
In Charlesburg, and his dad.
In those halls, there was a hall there, which was around the dining room. Marytown had a hall like we did, and the Holstein had one, and I can remember St. Peter had one, Bryan had one, the Holstein, all connected to a tavern. And then, of course, people are drinking beer and whiskeys and smoking like a banshee. You could hardly cut the smoke. But you had to come down and go through that. And you got under the basketball court, but they could close the doors to keep out of the smoke out. And we used to, we knew that it was going to be locked up. And the lady that lived there with her husband, Mike Balmer and Clara, would check the doors after we got done with the game and go back they lived there too, go back in their unit and go to bed. But we knew that they locked the doors, so we would unlock them. And the next morning we would go in and play basketball almost all day. And of course, that pounding of a basketball is not the most conducive thing. You know, I listened to that all day long. They weren't very happy with us. But we played a lot of basketball that way. I can tell you about the story. We were invited. The country club had the Green Bay Notre Dame club had a party out north at the golf course, so Oneida. And it so happened that I could invite somebody, so I invited Ed Casper, who was Dave Casper's father, who was a good friend of our family. And then across the table we were sitting down was a guy by the name of Paul Sherrill, who went to Notre Dame. Paul Sherrill eventually was the head of Fort Howard Paper Company. And when we would come home from Notre Dame, his mother would pick him up here at our house. And then they go from there. He was from Menasha. When I said he was the president of Fort Howard, that job was earned on his abilities alone. He had no pull through family members, but he worked his way up to the ladder where he was the chief CEO of Fort Howard. Well, I thought I'd have a little fun. He was sitting across the table from us, and then there was Ed Casper and myself. And I said, Paul, I'd like to introduce you to Ed Casper. He's the head of Save Winnebago, which was a corporation that Ed Casper set up to try to get the Lake Winnebago clean, you know, from runoff, from fertilizer and stuff like that. And also other things that would make the county better. But his thing was Save Winnebago. Well, Paul Sherrill, working for the paper company, was also being charged with polluter. And they started to talk to each other, and it was not a smart thing to do. Paul Sherrill afterwards said, if you ever do that to me, I'll kill you. Well, I don't think I talked to him since. I worked in the printing office for my dad, doing jobs with presses that if the state knew about it, he'd probably be in jail today. I mean, we put our hands in a press, and that would close up, and you better get your hand out. The next one, you put it in there, and you're going like this. And I handled hot lead. I cut the hot lead on a saw to fit the paper. Grandpa had a great relationship with the Post Crescent. I think that's the story I didn't tell you. He'd get the mat, which is nothing more than a heavy piece of cardboard that's imprinted by force on metal to take the picture. And I had to go and clean those. There were spots that were too high and show up as dark spots on the paper, so I had to go in and router it out. I've fed the big presses. I cleaned the big presses. It was. I got to the point that my dad would let me. Somebody came in and developed my own style for what they wanted, like something on their envelopes or letterhead, or big advertising bills that were put out. A lot of Teal and Teal auctioneers would put out posters of upcoming auctions, and they would list a lot of equipment, and I would put that together on the forms, lock them up, put them on the press, and run them.
You got to design that too?
Mm-hmm.
So you're like a brand manager.
Mm-hmm. From one end to the other, you had wooden type and you had metal type. Metal type came from the linotype machine, and the wood type. So you tell Clara, who operated the metal machine, what you wanted. She would do it for you, which was nothing more than listing. And then I would get that and build it into the bill for the advertising for the auction. And run about 100 or 150 of them, and they'd come in and pick them up, and I'd tear them back down. And so I knew a lot about the printing office before I left. And
did you have a computer back then?
Oh, I guess I did tell you that my dad had a good relationship with the Post Crescent. This was during the war, and everything was rationalized. Gasoline, butter, I can't think of what else. Well, my dad knew a guy down the street here that had a dairy and made butter. And my uncle had the gas station, so he could slip him some gas. But you had to have coupons. So I don't know where he got the coupons, but some of it was sold to them without coupons. He was hoarding evidently. Well, he also had a good relationship with the pea factory, canning peas, here in Hilbert. And he was able to get peas that were all cleaned, and they were all a small size. I mean, they were just ready to go in the can. And he would bring over a pail, and they'd fill it up for him. He'd take the pail over to Appleton, where they had noon luncheons, so the guys could build their lunches and stuff. And they fixed those peas for those guys, which the guys at the Post Crescent were just thrilled that they could have something like that. And plus, one of the big shots over there just loved to get the butter. So he built those relationships with those people till the day he died. And I could go over to the Post Crescent, and if there was a picture or something that was printed from the Hilbert area, I could go over and get that mat without asking anybody. Just walk right through the place. And of course the metal part, we had to make sure we got the metal back to them. So I'd go over, part of my product was the used parts that we didn't need anymore, so they gave that back, and then get a new set for what was happening now. But he was fortunate to get that relationship built. He was also a businessman that knew how to treat other people.
Yeah.
To get the first base. One time, of course, he was a big Republican, and the postmaster was a big Democrat. And I know at one of the elections of, I think it was Roosevelt, the guy from the post office, Roosevelt, Republican nominee, lost, and a Democrat won, and the guy came over to my dad's office to rub a little salt on him. and he got mad and he slugged the guy.
Don't mess with his politics.
Yeah, you didn't discuss that around him if there was a Democrat in the crowd. He was a good man, but he had his principles. As long as he had to be a Republican. And he also developed a relationship with a couple from Brillion, who were the people that recommended me for Notre Dame, and also for the job at Fontaine McCurdy. They did the audit for the Brillion Ironworks, and they were friends with my mother and dad, and he got a lot of work from the Brillion Ironworks. And there was a newspaper in Brillion, but there was the Ironworks at Aaron's, and you took one side or the other. Well, my dad took the side of the Brillion Ironworks, so that kind of cut him out of his relationship with the printer in Brillion. They got along, but the guy in Brillion didn't get anything from Brillion Ironworks. My dad got it all. But one of the things when you get to be this age, you do kind of try to live in the past and tell stories. I know the last time I told you, I was able to golf quite a bit. My wife has allowed me to do it. And we went to Myrtle Beach, 8 of us. One of them had to be the owner of a little golf course in Elkhart Lake, Tom Weasley. Baker from Baker Cheese, very good golfer. Well, there were 8 of us. Matthew, I have never seen a group of fellows get along as well as our 8 did. You ribbed the hell out of somebody else, just rode them as hard as you could, and they would come back and do it to you. There was never an argument, even though there was a lot of drinking. Nobody got in a fight. Nobody's feelings were hurt. It was just an unbelievable group of fellows. And you look forward to it every year because everybody had a few stories to tell from the year before. One of the golf courses we played in Myrtle Beach was a very tough course. And we went to the black tees. And the starter said, "Are you guys good enough, do you think, that you can play off the back tees?" They said, "Yeah." "Well, if you want to have fun, don't play off the backs because it's going to be too difficult for you. If you want to have fun, move up to the reds." No, Weezy wanted to play this golf, so we played it. Well, on the first tee, you had to get about 180 yards to get over the rough. And it was like that all the way around. Well, we got to the 18th hole, I was in such a foul mood. I putted out. There was a big sand trap there. Took my shoes off, buried them upside down in the golf course and walked away.
The golf course got the better of you, huh?
He got the best. And I don't deny that I have a little short fuse once in a while, too.
You threw your hand in the pound, it looked like you jumped in.
Yeah.
I think we were playing at Quickiac one time and we saw a guy throw his putter into the pond.
That could be.
He wasn't in our group, though.
We went to Green Lake one time, and on the 9th hole, it's water. I don't know if it's a par 3 or not. This guy parked his cart, he was right ahead of us, pulled out his club, went up to hit his ball, and his cart started to move right into the water. Were you along, Carol?
I don't think so. I might have been on the trip, but the ladies were probably playing separate. The men were first. I can remember the story.
How many hole-in-ones have you had? How many has your wife had?
Hard to take. All the golfing. I came up with that close once. I told you before, if you ever get a chance, I think you told me, yeah, but play Timberstone.
Mm-hmm.
Put that on your to-do list near the top if you can do it. It's just a wonderful golf course. And beautiful.
Iron Mountain?
Yeah. Carol made hers, and we went to the bar, so I said, you got to buy everybody a drink. There wasn't anybody in the bar. But the bartender came back and she said, "I'd like to buy some of you guys a drink. I just had a hole-in-one." Oh, he said, we're pretty busy. I'll have a soda on you, and that's it. Which was disappointing. They made no issue about it at all.
Yeah, that is disappointing. Where was that?
Eagle something? It's not far from Appleton.
Oh, Eagle Creek?
North and west of Appleton a little bit.
I think it was the only time we ever played that course. We were coming back from somewhere and we just had.
Quick story. During the winter, we played a lot of pool. I had a pool table. One of my buddies had a pool table. We were over at his house. It was a Saturday, and there was maybe six guys or something like that, or 4, I don't know. And it got to be time for church, and I said, I gotta get home. I gotta go to mass. But I was parked in. I don't know if your memory's that good, but you remember when I had the Cadillac, the big Cadillac that I bought from Grandpa Engler. Anyway, I used one of my buddy's cars, and he said, well, 6 o'clock, we'll finish playing pool. We'll drop the car off at the house, and I'll get my car back. Well, when we went to church, came back, my car isn't there. I wasn't too worried because they were playing pool. It was only 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, nothing. 6 o'clock, nothing. 7 o'clock, nothing. Now I knew something was up. Well, what they wanted to do was get a ticket on that car, so 2 or 3 of them drove it down in the whole scene. One of them was one of the girls from my office. She was driving. They would park on the sidewalk in the whole scene, trying to get a ticket on my car. Well, they weren't successful. And one of the guys, his wife was in the hospital going to have a baby the next day or two, Jim Burnett, 30. He ended up with taking my car home. Well, later on we found out that that's where my car was, at Jim Burnett's house. So I said to Carol, let's go down and pick up that car. And then we'll call them and tell them we've heard a call from the sheriff's department that there's been an accident with my car. So we went down there, got the car, brought it back, and one of the guys, we had a police scanner. We turned on that scanner, and he called. He said, Mr. Burnett, there's a car that's been involved in a car accident, and I understand somebody that you were the last one that drove it, or you had it. Yeah, he said, it's parked out by our house. He said, would you go and check? He came back, Jesus Christ, it's not there. He thought for sure he was talking to the sheriff. He was all shook up. And next morning his daughter was born, wasn't it? And he went there, but he had to, I don't know, did we get another car to him then in the morning or something like that? Finally had to bring a car down to him.
Their daughter is your age. Burnett's were in the, Kathy Burnett was in the hospital having Betsy. And so that would have been, you're what, 35? Yeah. And that was 35 years ago last January or February, I guess.
Yeah, I don't remember that car then because I was pretty young.
Ooh.
I'll see.
You'd have liked that one. I had a Buick, nice looking Buick, and the yellow one, and Joe wanted to use it. Well, the next morning he came back, he called, he said, Dad, I got a problem. I had an accident with your car. And it had to be pulled in by one of the guys from Chilton. He said, it's there at Chilton, I don't know if it's going to work anymore. Well, my dad got excited, and what was I going to say? Oh, I finally found out that the car was in an accident, but to this day, they won't tell me how it happened. He won't tell me. And the guy that pulled it back into town just died about 2 months ago. So I called Joe and I said, hey, your buddy just died. What buddy? What's his name? I said, what do you mean my buddy? I guess I got down to one now. I know. But I think I heard that he was driving down a railroad track and got stuck. It was the middle of winter. Jeez. That was the end of the Buick.
Oh, it was totaled?
Mm-hmm.
You saw it, yeah?
I'm surprised. Well, it was me, I guess. So I didn't get excited. I don't know how excited I got, but I'm sure that I was raising a little bit of hell.
Maybe you'll find out soon.
I had a lot of fun in life.
Good.
We had a good life.
A lot of fun.
Well, I don't have any other specific questions, so
Well, thank you for doing this, and
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
I'm sure it'll get through the family and generations.
Anxious to see how you edit all this stuff.
me too.